FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
We're back. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. This is Kerry Lutz. And boy, the instability, global instability, you can't even keep track of the number of wars, the number of conflagrations, of confrontations going on here. I mean, Asia, Middle East, Europe, Ukraine, Africa, even in South America, there's room for confrontation. And we've got Charles Hugh Smith of 2.Minds.com with us now. He's been writing about it. Charles, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Kerry. Glad to be here as always.
Hey, so you wrote 2 pieces basically about the 2 most destructive presidencies in history. And sure enough, they're back to back. We're talking about the current administration and the Bush 43 administration that preceded it. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. I mean, these 2 administrations have been, you look at it, lies, deceptions, withholding of information, attacks on the what little independent media there is left, and, fiscal irresponsibility on a scale that I don't think Nero could have ever imagined. And the country and the world are just going to a place that I don't think our parents could have ever imagined, Charles. It's just mind-numbing when you look at it.
Right, Kerry. And it's hard to see through all the noise and the chatter to try to get to the core of what's going on. And in my mind, those are 2 things which I wrote about. One was the destruction of civil liberties in defense of the nation, supposedly. In other words, the basic idea here is we have to take away all your civil liberties that have been enshrined in the Constitution, because otherwise bad guys will destroy the United States. That's the basic claim, and of course it's false. And the second thing that's happened is we have a totally incoherent foreign policy that spouts all these high ideals of democracy and defending freedom and blah, 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 but it's all just sort of expediency in which we ally ourselves to the most degraded, brutal dictatorships time and again. And we're all focused on killing the bad guys instead of contemplating the limits on our power. And perhaps we have to rectify or reconcile those 2 the main points, which you have to be a pragmatic approach in the world, but you also have to stick to our ideals, or you've lost the whole point of being American.
I'm beginning to think we have no ideals left in this country. I mean, forget about the dumbed-down educational system where people don't even know what year the War of 1812 was, or really the Declaration of Independence, who wrote it. I mean, you go down the list and it just can turn your stomach, But let's just assume that those are anomalous and people really do know what the country stands for. But, somehow country's just lost its way. We don't really know anything anymore. And yet people are coming here because they're still in default mode, Charles. They're fleeing oppressive regimes from all over the world, and they're coming to a regime that's becoming more oppressive by the day, and there is no place left to go. I was talking to Jim Rogers about this. He's in Singapore, and, where do you go? There's no place left to go.
Yeah, it's a tough problem, and people make their decisions on a lot of different things. I mean, for myself, I know people who have looked at Costa Rica, Canada, New Zealand, But I mean, a lot of us are stuck here because we have families here that need us. We can't really abandon people. And so it sort of boils down to, for those of us that can't leave, to what can we do in America? And of course, one thing we can do is just make sure that we don't go along with this thing of saying it's all okay. In other words, that everything is now secret and classified, so the powers that be can't be held accountable for the disasters and failures that they've created around the world in our name. So that's one thing we can do, and of course we can try to opt out of the most repressive systems. I mean, you say, well, that's not much, but as somebody said, I think it might have been one of the Eastern European leaders, that there is a thing called the power of the powerless. In other words, those of us who feel powerless, we actually do have power when we act together.
Yeah, there is a thing called the consent of the governed, and even the most oppressive regime cannot govern without the consent of the people they're governing. And you do reach a point where the people say, forget it, no more. And I think you're getting to that point in places like Venezuela, where they're just refusing to go along, but it's a long, hard process to shake off those shackles. And hopefully we never get there in the United States.
Yeah, I think that we can count our blessings in one regard, which is if we look at all these geopolitical conflicts in Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, Horn of Africa, you name it, Yemen, I think we can kind of boil out three themes. One of them is resource wars, right? I mean, energy, food, water, all these things are becoming scarce as the population's exploded, and people's desire to join the middle class has also increased. And then we can look at fragmentation of nation states, which, were sort of assembled by imperial fiat in the 1920s, like, for instance, Syria and Iraq.
Yeah.
And then we've got geopolitical fault lines where, like, say, Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine sits dead even between, the European West and the Russian East, and it's never going to be completely at ease, in those two, because it sits right on that fault line. And so we can expect all these kinds of conflicts to continue. In other words, I don't really see any easy answers or way out to resource wars, fragmentation of shall we say, sort of cobbled together nation states and nations that are sitting on geopolitical fault lines.
Yeah,
those are tough. Those are almost impossible to solve. And so it's our hubris to think that we can go in and remake the world and make all these fundamental problems go away and make it all go our way.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like, it's a manifestation of another human condition, and that is building these humongous skyscrapers to the sky, and that being an indicator of economic collapse ahead. Every time a city builds one of these huge, world's tallest buildings, it's a sign that they peaked economically and get ready for the collapse. That's the skyscraper index, and I'm just tying it in. And, but I do believe that that enlightened self-interest on all sides of the equation can actually solve these problems, Charles. I really do believe it. Unfortunately, there are times when enlightened self-interest doesn't work. And unfortunately, we're living through one of these times now, because when the economic system ceases to function properly, like it is now, enlightened self-interest takes a back seat to these tribal and lesser developed urges, human behaviors. You know what I'm saying? it's harder to put them in perspective when the economic system isn't functioning properly. And that's a function also of not having sound money. When you don't have sound money, then the system doesn't function properly and you have bad outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Kerry. And that we can, here in the States, most people are frozen and fearful of any kind of change because they know that their current job and income is totally dependent on the status quo continuing, even if that status quo is unsustainable, corrupt, and bad for the environment. They feel hopeless. And so, though, something that you and I have talked many times on in the program is, we've got to find some way individually and as families and communities to lessen our dependence on these kinds of sick, non-functioning, dysfunctional, unsustainable, debt-based, status quo systems. Because if that's the only way we're going to survive is to cling to a failing status quo, then we're going to fail as well.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's it. When you hitch your tent to a failing system, that's what you wind up with, right? You wind up with failure.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Kerry, we were speaking briefly before the program that you were talking about resetting the economy to 1913, which, as many of our listeners know, there was no Federal Reserve. The money of the United States was based on gold, and there was no income tax. All the federal government was funded by excise taxes and things like that, import taxes, and that was enough.
That was
unbelievable.
Enough. Yeah, isn't that remarkable? That was enough then, and now all these tax sources, and they still don't have enough, right? No. They still don't have enough.
No,
remarkable.
We have to borrow another $1 trillion every year.
Yeah, and that is showing still not to be enough. Hey, let's talk more about this when we return on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio.
Are you worried about the coming dollar collapse? Then Borderless Holdings, formerly known as Owings Metals, is the place to go. Gold and silver are the key to protecting your wealth from a declining dollar. Call them now at 855-604-6343. The Borderless Holdings team will eliminate the anxiety and take the guesswork out of your precious metals buying decision. I recently purchased silver bullion from them at the lowest possible price. Would you believe I got my metals delivered in less than a week? Seth Peretzman, Kevin Drost, and the guys at Borderless Holdings are great people who pride themselves on providing the highest level of service to all their clients and always exceed your expectations. Call them now at 855-604-6343. That's 855-604-6343, or visit them at www.borderlessholdings.com and tell them Kerry sent you.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
We're back on the Financial Survival Network with Charles Hugh Smith, and we're talking about the failure of the current system and the two most damaging administrations. So, Charles, we got this situation where the IRS lost emails of, interestingly enough, not everybody in the IRS, but 7 people who just happened to be under subpoena, who were going after political opponents of the administration. It's just amazing how that works, because here they expect you and I and every other American to keep meticulous records of every transaction that you enter into. And here they can't even keep their own emails in order. And going back to, Nixon, I mean, the guy was impeached for far less than what's happening here. Don't you find that rather remarkable?
It's a tremendous irony, definitely, Kerry. And it's interesting you mentioned Nixon, the Nixon administration, which was blown out of office basically based on abuse of power, abuse of executive branch power. And I think it's pretty clear that everybody that was involved in the Watergate scandal and cover-up knew they were breaking the law. They absolutely knew that, and that was why they were covering it up. But the last 2 presidents and their administrations, Bush, Obama, there is no sense that they're breaking the law. They simply say, the president authorized this, so it's legal. And so we've not just lost credibility, we've lost the rule of law. Now anything goes as long as the president authorizes it. So how is that different from a dictatorship or a monarchy or a fascist totalitarian state? And there is no difference.
None.
And I think that, it also ties into, we were talking about money, and I think that's the third sort of terribly destructive element to the Bush-Obama administrations, is they've played along with the Federal Reserve's destruction of the U.S. economy. Now, we can blame the Fed because it's supposedly an independent agency, but of course, Bernanke was appointed, by Bush, and all the Treasury Department, was filled with Wall Street cronies like Geithner and you name it. So I think the presidents have a direct responsibility for the destruction of the economy, as well as the Fed. And we can talk about central planning. Like, when did we get the idea that it was okay for one person, namely the Fed chairperson, to set the interest rates for the entire nation?
And the world.
Yeah, and the world. What if they made a mistake?
Yeah.
In other words, is it really wise to take away the market's ability to price risk and the cost of capital and these sort of fundamentals of capitalism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think it's wise at all. I think it's setting up a catastrophe. And I don't think anybody can argue that one person is all wise. And again, it's another example of hubris and a lack of humility.
And a lack of common sense, too, because this can't end well. Because if you know anything about the free market, all you have to do is read about 15 minutes worth of Ludwig von Mises or Rothbard about the importance of the pricing mechanism, that you've got millions of people interacting, and that pricing is the ultimate way that information about a market is communicated. And the fact is that when you get a central authority imposing prices upon a vast array of participants in a market, it really acts to the detriment of that market, and you have all sorts of anomalous results occurring because the person or the authority, unilaterally imposes price discipline on that market. And I know Martin Armstrong, always tells me when he first went to China and they were watching the tea market in China, and, all these different tea prices were occurring, and they, as hard as it was for the communists, they kept their hands off the tea market and let it function. And somehow they learned something from that. Not that they're perfect capitalists, mind you, but obviously, they learned that the pricing mechanism is the best way to allocate scarce resources, because the government just can't do it very well. And you just have to look at malinvestment across the globe. And yeah, the Federal Reserve is the chief villain when it comes to all the economic ills of the world, or certainly of the United States right now. And the Chinese are replicating our errors times 10 right now, right, Charles?
Yeah, sadly, it's like when you distort the economy and distort the price mechanism, like you said, then we end up with bubbles and credit bubbles and asset bubbles. And it sucks in a lot of otherwise innocent people, shall we say, who believe the story that, housing can never go down, or, stocks are at a permanently high plateau, all the same sort of misinformation that we've seen, proven false time and again here. The crash of 2000, the crash of 2008, the housing crash of 2008, and now we have more bubbles that have been set up by more of this sort of central bank intervention, and we know it's not going to end well anywhere in the world. And the terrible thing is, Kerry, is if we had legitimate leadership, there is a role for a central bank, or at least you could make that argument, that in a liquidity crisis, the central bank can provide liquidity and keep the market from freezing up. That's the one as far as I can tell, the one legitimate function of a central bank. But we don't have that kind of central bank. We have one that wants to set the interest rates, reward its cronies with free money. It's one of those slow things, like the frog being boiled, in a pot of water. We've lost sight of what a legitimate government should be limited to doing, a legitimate central bank should be limited to doing, and we've just sort of ceded unlimited powers to a bunch of fools, basically, who believe that, I guess they apparently believe that they are godlike and can set the right policies, and it's all going to turn out positively. But as you said, once you distort the markets so severely, it can only end badly.
Yeah, we know that. We've seen that over and over again. And this time, because the markets are so interwoven and intertwined, and the world's economies are so connected, it's going to end badly for the entire world, except for the most primitive, disconnected economies. And you're just going to see this cascading collapse just sweep the globe. And as much as the Chinese and the Russians would like to disconnect, they still sell to the markets. They can disconnect all they like, but the markets that they're dealing with, those are the ones that are going to stop buying from them after they collapse. So the result is still going to be the same here,
Yeah, exactly. We're very independent. Well, Kerry, tell me a bit, summarize your view of what's happening to gold right now after several months of sort of stabilization and kind of a, if you want to call it a long bottom, is how I would describe it.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I just talked with Craig, a.k.a. Turd Ferguson. Well, the silver market just blasted through this trend line from 2011, and it's headed for really higher, higher and higher. At some point, it's going to eclipse its previous $50 high, and then the gold price, that's really, they just both went through even numbers, $1,320 with such intensity yesterday that you can just see what's happening. You can just see it. So that's going to be intense. And, the fact that going through 200-day moving averages, everything is just lined up, and add some more political instability to it. It's not going to be a straight up line. I mean, not like last time. I don't think it'll be parabolic, but you could see some periods of time where it really moves up violently, intensely, with unbridled enthusiasm, and then it kind of straightens out. And we have to keep our eye on the geopolitical breakdowns that I think are gonna keep going up and up and up, especially if we see these food prices, Charles, really take another hike up from droughts and from inflation. So it's going to be interesting. But I think yesterday was a pretty significant move. They tried to fight back gold down, tried to knock it down $20. It fought back up today, and it's only down $5. I don't know. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think you're right, Kerry, and I think we can look at the commodities, not the building commodities that have been blown into a bubble by China, like copper and iron so much, but you look at food, you look at grains, maybe the energy, sector. It's likely that we'll see, if the resource wars intensify, as I think is likely, then we might see some leaps in all sorts of food-related commodities. And we've seen, for instance, coffee, which I know is not an essential, but it's a near essential, and for many people, myself included.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd do, man. If Starbucks starts selling it to me for $10 a cup, we're gonna part ways,
Yeah, so I mean, at the wholesale level, it doubled, and it's fallen back a little bit. But I don't think it's at all out of the realm of possibility to see things that we have assumed for so long are going to stay cheap, such as corn, wheat, pork, you name it, and all those things could double, as you say, and very quickly when shortages occur or global supply disruptions occur.
Yeah, which they will. And Charles, we got to go now. Just tell us where we find your work and how we buy your excellent books, which are well worth the read.
Thank you, Kerry. Just visit me at of2minds.com and take a look at the blog and all my books there.
All right. Excellent. Link is found on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. We are always posting Charles's excellent articles. Just go there. Don't forget, sign up for the free newsletter. Charles, we'll talk with you again real soon. You be well.
Thank you, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.